have to have a better understanding of our nature. And understanding that this instrument that we call our body and our mind is, hundreds of thousands of years old, and it hasn't changed a lot in all that time. And so it really is in our best interest to understand how it navigates the world. And one of the things that we know about, and I talk about this in the book, is that meaning and purpose are inherent to leadership. If we're going to get, humans are meaning-seeking creatures, and we are meaning-assigning creatures. We must seek and assign meaning in everything that we do. My dad always called that leaving tracks, which to him was your legacy that you leave in this world. And he would always lecture my brother and me about the importance of leaving tracks. That's the ultimate metric. How much money you make, where you live, your occupation, that's all kind of a booby prize. It's a distraction. The real metric in your life is what kind of tracks do you leave? Those indelible impressions that they don't just serve the people around you, but they serve the people who you'll never even meet. And if you think about leaders that you knew in your life, Steve, who did that, how clear were they on what they were doing? How clear were they on their purpose? And that clarity is what we follow.
Leaders are not born in a womb. They are forged through heat, pressure, and a whole lot of sweat. The Fire Forged Leader podcast serves the audience through exploring leadership at work, in the community, and with the family, using a practical perspective and real-life experiences from the host, Steve Baumgartner, and his guests in The Forge. Now, it's time to enter the Forge with the Fire Forged Leader.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Fire Forged Leader podcast. Today on the cast, we have Scott Mann. I'm not going to tell you a lot about Scott, except for I just read his new book coming out. Beautiful book. It comes out in stores in October, right, Scott?
It does, yeah.
October
3rd, I believe, is the actual date.
Yeah, so October 3rd, you can go ahead and pre-order it right now. Mm-hmm. I would suggest that you do it. There is a lot of good information in this book, and I don't want to give any spoilers right now, but probably the toughest question that I'm going to ask you today, Scott, is who the hell is Scott Mann?
Boy, that is a tough question. Let's see. Well, let's start with for me, the basics. Husband, father, son, brother, very much a son of God and Green Beret, and friend, and Rooftop leader. I would leave it at that. A guy that's really, really adamant about the art and science of human connection in a very divided world.
So second hardest question I'm going to ask you is, what is the most important thing that you've done in your life?
The most important thing that I have done in my life would be to marry Monty Mann.
I can see where she'd play a pivotal role after reading about her in the book. Also seeing the play on Amazon, which was phenomenal, by the way.
Thank you. Honestly, and I really mean that. Like, if I look back on the things in my life that flowed from different things, that's pivotal, right? Those are then by far, the things that became possible in my life flowed from marrying her and what came out of that relationship, and still does, frankly.
I'll definitely send this clip to her like you asked me to do.
Yeah, just checks in the mail, man.
No, I appreciate that. If you guys have a chance, go out and check out this play, because it's awesome. And I tell you what, there's a certain strength that also is shown through your guys' interactions within that play, right? That the character in the play definitely wasn't just a character that was written offhand, right?
Yeah, it's the play has been such a journey. It's been a 6-year development. I started the development of that play last out because I felt like all of the movies, all of the books, the war was still going at this point. My oldest son had told me he wanted to go in the Army. I had left the special ops community pretty disgruntled with how we were treating the Afghans in 2012. I saw where it was heading. And so all of that conspired to really push me to do something to try to help Americans understand the cost of war and to validate those who lived it. I was already a speaker and a trainer, and I was working with acting coaches who had taught me some of their craft, and they were always on me to write a play. And so that play really was my best attempt to say, okay, look, you see all the movies and books about the first in, the door kickers, the elite forces that go in, and they're great, but you never hear about the last out. You never hear about the men and the women who go back day after day, month after month, year after year to these trust depleted places and their families that go through all that, and what it means to serve in the longest war in our nation's history with almost no recognition by the rest of the world. And that was the story I wanted to tell. And so you're right. The sub themes and the stories and even just the relationships within that play are, super powerful. Plus all the cast members are either veterans or military family members. So that really, I think, amps up the authenticity of intention that's in the story already.
Oh, 100%. I never served, but the emotion, just the raw emotion of the play is absolutely amazing. It brings you right into all of those feelings and all of those, things that I never experienced, but you can just imagine what all of our service member who had to endure all that stuff, dealt with day in and day out.
It's true. And I think it was Maya Angelou who said, years from now, people won't remember what you said or how you said it. What they'll remember is how you made them feel. And because we are emotional creatures, our emotions they tell us how to navigate the world. And I believe that what's missing from a lot of our communications today, and frankly, our shared perspective on hard things, is that we don't have an emotional access to those things. In other words, you can watch a movie about the war and that kind of thing, but until you've actually experienced to some level what it's like to say goodbye to your wife at the airfield or hold your buddy in his final moments, I think it's difficult really to appreciate what it is to serve. And certainly, I think the other reason that you talk about the emotions, and I think that's so important, is because if we're going to ask our sons and daughters to go fight in these places all over the world, day after day, then we sure as hell need to know what we're asking them to do. And to the degree that we can, we need to look for ways to feel that, right? Because we're going to be less inclined to deploy them casually if we have felt some semblance of what that experience is like. And that was what I was going for there.
Yeah, you brought me right into, you talked about a gentleman who was in a wheelchair in this book, and the experience that you had with him after one of the plays.
Yeah, Corey Breest. Mm-hmm.
And that, I tell you what, reading that last night, because I just got to that last night.
Yeah.
It brought me to tears.
Yeah.
I mean, it was.
Yeah. And what a cool thing to be brought to tears, right, Steve? I mean, honestly, you're a guy that you're a man's man. You train in combatives. You do, tough things in your life. But the reality is, all of us, I think, could stand to be brought to tears a little bit more in our life, because it is that emotional access that makes us uniquely human. And that's what I loved about the play so much, particularly following the way we left Afghanistan, because it allowed me to travel around the country and look in the eyes of these men and women and their families who gave so much, and just tell them, hey man, it really mattered. Like, what you did made a difference, and what you did meant something to me personally, and thank you. And I'm grateful for that, and I'm grateful. I was brought to tears a lot on the road, and I like to think that I was brought to tears even more than I brought people to tears from the stage. It was those moments, Steve, like that after the show in the lobby and in the theater itself and in the parking lots, that those kind of interactions happened every city, and we went to 30 cities, and I am so grateful for those because it was my reintroduction to America in what everybody says is our worst days and our darkest days. But I tell you, you meet guys like Corey and Jenny and their family, and you just think, wow, you know what? I think we're going to be okay. I think we're going to be fine because Corey's out there. And that's what that meant to me. And I'm just super grateful for it.
So we don't leave the audience hanging in the dark on this one. Can you tell us a little bit about that story with Corey so that they get the context?
Yeah, sure. And so we performed this play last out, and it's about a notional character that's really based on three characters that I knew in the war that didn't come home, and I've rolled them into one character named Danny Patton, and he is trying to ascend to the warrior resting place of Valhalla because he's been mortally wounded in the first scene, but he can't let go. He's stuck between his fire base and his living room. And his buddies who were killed in the war as well come down from Valhalla, and they take him through his life and show him all the things from his life that made his heart pump the most blood on the good and the bad side. They show him when he joined Special Forces. They introduce him to, they become the people in the life who put him through Special Forces. They become his wife, who he's in love with, his only son, Caden. They become his arch nemesis, Saeed Wali and Colonel Smith, until he finally figures out what he's holding on to and he lets go. Well, in one of the scenes, Danny is having a conversation with his wife, Lynn, and he's about to deploy, and they're talking about, I just happen to have it on, the silly band that his son Caden gave him. And Caden called it a magic silly band. And so when she sees this, she's astounded that he even gave it to him because he never takes it off. And so we're talking about this silly band on the stage, and I heard a gasp out in the audience. Now, I knew exactly who the gasp was coming from. It was a gentleman named Corey Breest. This was in Vermilion, South Dakota. Corey was gravely wounded in the Iraq War as a medic, and he lost most of his eyesight. He was partially paralyzed, and his traumatic brain injury. So he went through a lot. And he's in the front row with his wife, Jenny, and his father. And I could see him moving under the lights, and I could feel him moaning during that conversation. And it wasn't a painful moan. It's hard to explain, but I could tell I had connected with him. So we did the scene, and then afterwards I went out in the lobby like we always do to talk to the audience, and Corey's dad pushed him up in the wheelchair, and he said, Scott, and I knelt down in front of Corey, and he said, Corey loved the play, and I said, cool, what was your first favorite scene? And his dad said, what do you think? And I said, I think it was the silly band scene. And his dad said, yeah. And he goes, but do you know why? And I said, no, sir. And he said, look down at Corey's wrist. And I did. And he said, do you see that white ring around his wrist that's whiter than the rest of his arm? And I said, yes, sir. And he said, that's where his daughter's silly band was burned into his wrist when the IED went off. And the tears just rolled, man. And Corey cried and his dad cried. And again, it was one of those moments where it was just such a deep, visceral connection, Steve. And I knew in that moment that we had made a connection on so many different levels, and that's what I've always tried to teach about storytelling, is that even the most seemingly insignificant moments in the stories that we tell, if it's personal, it's universal. And in the things that are most intimate to us and mean the most to us, someone else will locate themselves in that story and they'll make meaning out of it. And it became Corey's favorite part of the play, right? And in the scene, in the actual context of the play, it's not, it's an important moment, but it's it's a setup for the larger part of the story. But for Corey, it was the play. Right? Because everything was contained in that same silly band that he, had burned into his skin. And it was just a point of connection for us that we still stay in contact with one another. And that was years ago. So And that's in the book. And so those kinds of stories are what's in the book. Nobody's coming to save you. And it just, they're representative of what all of us are capable of if we share stories that come from the heart and that are personal.
I'm trying to hold them back right now.
Yeah. Yeah, it was tough. And there's a million of them, man. Like that. But I'm so grateful for them. I don't, I've got to the point in my life where those things that move me like that, I'm just grateful for them. I don't try to make them anything they're not. I don't try to fight it back. I just consider myself a vessel, and I just let those emotions blow in and out like the wind. And I'm grateful that I get to feel them because, I got to meet Corey, and feel
Right.
some version of what his lived experience has been, and the world's a better place for it.
And I don't think people really understand, right? I mean, when we were fighting other wars, and I'm far from an expert in wars, but when you look at, World War One, World War Two, all these different wars, people deployed and they either came back or didn't come back, right? When we're talking about the Middle East, people deployed and they deployed and they deployed and they deployed. And there's so much that comes from that. I talked to a person who works with law enforcement individuals, right? And they talk about the long,
Yeah.
series of emotional struggles that they go through. But, the military going in and out and in and out and deploying so much, there's a lot that these men and women have to carry every day. And
I agree.
yeah,
Yeah, I agree. There is, and it's hard to understand it. President Bush after 9/11, he assured the American people in an address to Congress that the war would be fought in the shadows, away from the general public by special operators and intelligence personnel. And he was right. That's exactly what happened for 20 years, 4 times longer than World War II. Less than 1% of the American population fought a war. There's only, there's 340 million Americans. There's 1.8 global war on terror veterans. So, there's 6,500 Green Berets. So just do the math on that. And, most of those Green Berets, like the SEALs and Delta and others, they went multiple times. They did, I did 3 tours over there, and that's a drop in the bucket compared to what a lot of these guys and girls have done. And they did it over and over and over again. Hence the name of the play, Last Out, because that's what I wanted to convey, is that there isn't like this infinite, it's not a Fortnite game when we deploy men and women into harm's way. We have a tendency to call them small wars or small conflicts. Well, the bullets aren't small. They're 7.62, just like all the bullets in the big wars. And they have a devastating effect on a military family over a prolonged period of time, and on our veteran population, no matter how tough they are. So we as a citizenry, I believe, have an inherent obligation to have a better understanding of what conflict is and what combat is and what it means to deploy our blood and treasure to these, and be, more judicious in how we do it, and certainly more focused on what our politicians are doing. And again, I'm not an anti-war guy. I'm not a pro-war guy. This is an apolitical statement, but I do believe our citizenry, for the most part, for that war, was completely removed and disconnected from the war. And a lot of it was not their fault, but some of it can be corrected. Some of it we need to fix, like the way we abandoned the Afghans in 2021, and then just turned the page on the GWAT veterans who fought with them like it ServPro, like it never even happened. That was wrong, and that needs to be righted. And if you're wondering why recruiting and retention sucks, that's because of a large part of how that went down.
When I've listened to a ton of podcasts with you and other Green Berets. I listened to the podcast with Legend, actually a couple different ones, different things like that. And I realized how blind I was as a civilian to all of the crap that went down, right? And how you and I've had Nick Lavery on the podcast and a couple different others.
Yeah.
And the relationships that you have to build, and then just to leave everybody in the dust like that is tremendously wrong. I mean, it's absolutely horrible.
It is. It's a moral injury. It's a moral injury. It is in my opinion, the highest form of betrayal. And I don't know what's more striking to me, that our senior leaders actually put our veterans and active duty members in that position, and our guardsmen and reservists, or that they all pretended like it just wasn't that big of a deal, and they just moved on and preserved their careers or preserved their positions within the military industrial complex so they didn't lose their contracts. I don't get a lot of Christmas cards from generals and admirals anymore, and I don't really give a shit, because the way that this was handled was so disingenuous on a segment of the population who frankly did what they were asked for 20 years. They carried the water. And you know what? If you abandoned a partner on the battlefield in any way or demonstrated that kind of treatment of a partner, you were held to a very high standard of Uniform Code of Military Justice. Like you got in trouble over that. And then for it to just happen in the way that it did, and the generals and admirals to stay silent on all of that, I think inflicted even more of a sense of betrayal. There were no stars on the table. There was no accountability at all. And the answers we got back from those senior leaders were, well, what do you want me to do? Retire every time I disagree with a politician? If it's immoral, yes. Yes, we do. And that didn't happen at all. And I think that's just a big, to your point, Steve, we have military service. It's a social contract in a voluntary army between the service member and the nation. And there's a contract. It's an actual contract, but it's also an implicit contract that these veterans or these service members will go and do what the nation asks them to do, to include die if necessary, but that the nation will honor them and their service, right? And it's reciprocal. Well, that was cast asunder during that abandonment. What we were taught by the very people who betrayed it was that you do not leave a partner force on the battlefield. You do not abandon them and act like it didn't happen. And as a result of that, and then the nation just turning the page on it like it didn't happen, now what you have is a violation of that social contract. And I think that's why the volunteer army is struggling. I think that's why the American people have just over 50% favorable trust for the military, when it used to be in the 70s before the Afghanistan collapse. And it's baffling to me that senior leaders across diplomatic, government, military, political levels can't figure that out.
And I just don't understand the reason, right? I mean, we just up and left people to die, right? And I don't know. I'm sure that there's a money trail or something that I'm missing in there, but I just don't understand the reason why. What's your speculation on that?
Well, I tell you, if you get a chance, if you haven't read it, Operation Pineapple Express is the book that I wrote on the abandonment, and at the end is an epilogue, and there's an updated epilogue in which I cover my journey to testify to the House Foreign Affairs Committee. And within those two, I think are my biggest points on why I think this happened. And I think there's a lot of reasons for it. But I believe it became politically inconvenient. I believe that the war became politically inconvenient. And I think there were senior officers who tried to convince this administration not to do it. In other words, to leave a force of 2,500 in place. And that didn't work. The administration stayed on the course and continued that reckless abandonment. But my problem with this is, and this is what I don't understand, and I don't, is it careerism? Probably. But the fact that those senior voices, those 07s, 08s, generals, admirals, that they stayed silent during that and did not put their stars on the table, on behalf of the men and women who had served them faithfully for 20 years. That is the part to me that is egregious And frankly, I'll never understand it. And I've tried to get certain generals, and I name them in the epilogue to explain it to me, and instead they just get pissed off and give you this look like, how dare you, question my decision. I am a general. And it's like, well, dude, you've questioned my decisions all the way through my career. I'm questioning yours now. Like, be accountable. And none of them have. And this also includes a lot of the ones in retirement. Sure, they did things behind the scenes, but where we needed our senior leaders the most, Steve, during this period, particularly of moral injury, we needed them in the public space. We needed them being voices and advocates for the veteran population who felt that moral injury. And I mean, you tell me, have you seen any generals or admirals advocating or demanding personal accountability or owning it since this happened in 3 years? I haven't seen one, not one.
No, I'd sure know a lot more about it if they had, right?
Yeah, I think we all would. And I think, no one's, looking, I don't mean this in a witch hunt kind of way, but I think it's going to be very difficult to move forward. I think it's going to be very difficult to put assurances in place to the veteran population of the GWAT generation that our kids aren't going to go through this if we don't see some kind of crystallized learning, some kind of personal responsibility, some kind of assurance that measures have been put in place to fix this. None of that's happened. None of that's happened. In fact, if you bring any of this up in military circles on active duty, you get fired. So again, serve pro, like it never even happened. And I have a problem with that. That's a lack of moral courage on the part of senior leadership. And I just have a problem with it. And I would love for people to tell me where I'm wrong, but I can't see my way to understand how that's okay.
Yeah, I agree. If we saw that in the private sector, we'd have CEOs brought up on charges, right?
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. That's exactly right. And it's just we were all taught in the military, if you screwed up, own it. You just own it. In this case, yes, was it a policy mistake? It was a policy mistake, but there were a lot of military opportunities for senior leaders to say, you know what? I understand this is what the administration did, but on behalf of the men and women that served under me and that fell and their families and everybody, I'm taking responsibility for this. This cannot stand. And I am laying it on the table right now. Like, just one dude would have done that. It could have changed the whole game. Just one. But crickets.
Agreed. Absolutely sickening, Scott. And I appreciate everything that you and everybody else did to try and make that right.
We did. And, I don't know. I made plenty of mistakes in that country too. But I will say in my book, Game Changers, that I wrote about my experiences in Afghanistan, and since then, and in Pineapple, I'm pretty forthcoming about, I made a ton of mistakes. I made a lot of mistakes. I've tried to own them. And I don't understand how we can't do that at every echelon, and then expect our volunteer army to somehow just keep functioning like this didn't happen. And when you see the suicide rate going through the roof with the GWAT veterans, when you see, substance abuse and homelessness and all these things, and this isn't victimhood. This is an absolute violation of one's moral code by the people that you trusted. And it has an effect. It has an effect, particularly on a vulnerable population that's been in sustained combat. So the fact that our leaders can't even see that and are not stepping into the fray on that, I'm putting a call out there. Is like, let's put this behind us. Let's get some accountability for it, some responsibility, and see if we can't start fixing this so that we can reestablish trust in our volunteer force, and that our kids, we actually feel comfortable telling our kids they should serve. Because right now I struggle with it.
Yeah, I can imagine. And you got one in the Army.
I do. And he's great. And he's doing a wonderful job. And I respect the hell out of him. And he knows that. But he also knows how I feel about how things went down. And I'm not changing that for anybody. And I'm not sugarcoating that for anybody. I have a real problem with the way this went down. And I think a lot of people do. And it is unresolved. And it needs to be resolved.
Agreed. And that, I sit here and try and imagine the the emotional and physical burden that you have when you're, you call it rooftop leadership because that's what you guys did, right? I mean, you were working in the best interest of the village people and then building up trust to where they would want to follow and be beside you on the rooftops. So just to set that stage, and you're building this trust the entire time. You're working towards that trust, and you think you have all this backing in the background. And now all of a sudden you're abandoning all these people because of some idiot in the White House's orders, right? And how do you ever trust again on that kind of scale, with, I don't know. I don't even know where I was going with that, but
well, it's tough because, well, it is because, again, like I said, it's a social contract. And honestly, I don't think it's unique to special forces or the military or, if you think about it, the approach to this what I call rooftop leadership, it is about operating in a low trust, high stakes environment. And I call it the churn. That's what I call it. Nobody's coming to save you. And it's very much here in the United States. It's very much in the West is this disengagement, distraction, disconnection that's all around us. And what it does is it divides us. There's this division, this tribal shadow, this shadow tribalism that's dividing us as a nation. Just look at how we're acting around the election. We're unfriending people that we've been friends with for 30 years on social media because they disagree with a political candidate. I mean, it's madness. And we're speaking with contempt, as Sebastian Junger says, of people that we would normally reserve that kind of contempt for our enemies. And we're using that contempt and moral superiority and rigidity with our neighbors. And my point is that those are the exact kind of conditions that we faced in Afghanistan. And if we don't learn how to bridge across that and refocus on social capital, those tangible and intangible linkages that allow us to connect as humans and get big stuff done, we're in trouble. Because what we're on right now is a pathway to tribalism, a pathway that can result in organizational collapse, societal collapse. It's not a good recipe. There's all this loose talk of war and civil war. And I just think, man, those are people that have never heard the crack of a round or seen an insurgency or a civil war up close and personal, because does not end well. And so what I'm saying, Steve, is that this whole notion of rooftop leadership, we used it to build social capital and rapport and trust with locals when trust was low. But over time, we leveraged it, and they would go up to the rooftops when we were attacked and fight alongside us because they chose to do it, because there was a deep enough relationship there that we built trust when risk is low. We leveraged it when risk was high. And that's what we need in this country right now. We need the ability to build trust again and to install social capital at every level, particularly our communities and our businesses. And that's not going to come from politicians. That's why I call it nobody's coming to save you. Because I didn't wake up this morning and go, woo, thank God for Washington, D.C. Heck yeah, man. I mean, and regardless of who's in power, I just don't think that's how we live our lives. We don't wake up doing an end zone dance because of Washington. We know that what we get done in our life is because of what we do and our neighbors do. Nobody's coming. And that's okay. That's a good thing. But the churn that we face today is so different and so profoundly advanced that we need a new skill set to navigate that churn. And that's what my book's about.
Yeah, so that's a nice segue. I kind of took you right into the play and everything else, but let's go back to the beginning, right?
Sure.
Started pretty simply in your life, just a little bit south of me.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I've lived all over. My dad was a U.S. forester, and he fought wildland fire, and he was a timber specialist and a forester, and we lived in little logging towns all over the South. But I spent a lot of my time in Arkansas, and grew up in a very rural area. And it was as a kid that I saw a Green Beret and in our soda shop when I was 14, and for that it was on for me for the rest of my life. That's what I wanted to do, and it's what I did. And it was mainly because of the stories that he told me. in that moment as a 14-year-old kid, and it entranced me in such a way. This notion of going into these low trust places and building relationships, using interpersonal skills, and then helping those people and fighting alongside them, had such a Lawrence of Arabia kind of flair to it that I just fell in love with that, and that became my life. And it was from that world that I really saw up close and personal that the human operating system is not just reserved for Afghanistan. We're all wired essentially the same way to connect with one another. And if you understand the human operating system and how it works, this primal ancient creature, then you have a competitive advantage in how you connect with other people and influence them. And that's just been my obsession. You know, I spent almost 23 years in the Army, 18 of that as a Green Beret, and then I've been out for 12. And in that 12 years, it's been like I've pursued this human connection thing because I think it's undeveloped space, Steve. What Tim Ferriss is to high performance, I've tried to be to human connection. You know, everything from 3 TED Talks, hundreds of keynotes, news appearances, writing books, writing plays, and then to complete my midlife crisis, learning how to act at age 50. All of those are different approaches to human connection because each of them is its own craft. And then melding all that together into this, what I call rooftop leadership methodology, so that I can now, you know, at 56 years old, pour myself into other people who want to bridge gaps in times of trust, whether they're in sales or whether they're, you know, leading a nonprofit or they're a C-suite executive. All of us are in low trust, and all of us need to lead through human connection. So that's why I wrote the book, and that's really what my background has led me to.
I really like that whole soda shop example, right? Fire Forge leader, you know, we come from some of the most interesting places. And, you know, you talk about your dad and, you know, the logging towns, and your dad's name's Rex, right?
Rex, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Rex.
Good memory.
So Rex in here, there's a line that I remember, and it was something to the effect of you leaving tracks in the world. And that's one of the parts that just really sticks with me in the book is, you know, him taking you out and showing you the physical tracks. And that was a story in itself, really, when it comes down to it.
I agree, and I appreciate you bringing that up. I mean, in the book, I talk a lot about the human operating system because that is the first thing, I think, as rooftop leaders that we have to, if we're going to get big stuff done in this world, we have to understand how we're wired. We have to have a better understanding of our nature, and understanding that this instrument that we call our body and our mind is, you know, hundreds of thousands of years old, and it hasn't changed a lot in all that time. And so it really is in our best interest to understand how it navigates the world. And one of the things that we know about, and I talk about this in the book, is that meaning and purpose are inherent to leadership. If we're going to get, you know, humans are meaning-seeking creatures, and we are meaning-assigning creatures. We must seek and assign meaning in everything that we do. My dad always called that leaving tracks, which to him was your legacy that you leave in this world. And he would always lecture my brother and me about the importance of leaving tracks. That's the ultimate metric. You know, how much money you make, where you live, your occupation, that's all kind of a booby prize. It's a distraction. The real metric in your life is what kind of tracks do you leave? Those indelible impressions that they don't just serve the people around you, but they serve the people who you'll never even meet. And if you think about leaders that you knew in your life, Steve, who did that, I mean, how clear were they on what they were doing? How clear were they on their purpose? And that clarity is what we follow when times are hard and when trust is low and stakes are high. We follow leaders who are clear. We follow leaders who are clear on their purpose and their legacy. And it gives us a sense of ourselves because they have a sense of themselves. We start to get a sense of ourselves, and we start to make sense of our own life. And that's who we want to be around. We want to be around leaders who are clear because it allows us to get clear. And that's why I've always loved that saying. It became more important to me as my dad went through the illnesses that he went through, and I saw it on full display with him in real time as a man. But yeah, I mean, and I really kind of start the book after the human operating system with that leaving tracks concept, because if we're not clear on the tracks that we're leaving, then I don't know what the hell we're doing in this world anyway.
Yeah, my dad says it a different way. He said, the only thing that we're ever going to be able to take with us is our memories.
Well, it's
Right?
about, yeah, that's well said. That's beautiful.
Yeah, it's, so that really connected with me when I read that. But, you talk about, clarity when you talk about leaving tracks and
Yeah.
meaning and purpose. But that also connects to storytelling, right? Because clarity isn't just ABC,
Right.
right? It's
Right.
also a connection in there.
Well, going back to the human operating system, another thing that I use the acronym MESS, meaning seeking, emotional, social storytellers who struggle. That's what we are. That's what this primal creature is. That's the essence of the human operating system. So we're storytellers. And we're story animals. We've been telling stories for 70,000 years. In fact, the brain has a mandate to make sense of the world, and storytelling is a sense-making tool. The brain tells itself a story before it considers or processes a PowerPoint deck or a spreadsheet. It tells itself a story first. And so the leaders who can put their ideas into a story are the ones that are going to own every room. They're going to be more relatable. They're going to be more relevant. And so storytelling is absolutely essential. And if you want to think about it, just like you said, from a leadership perspective and purpose, Oxford Analytica did a study on great leaders throughout history, from Alexander the Great to Martin Luther King to Lady Gaga, in terms of, not that she's a great leader, but she inspired a movement, right? She did. And so what is it that these leaders all had in common in terms of inspiring movements? Well, they were very clear on their purpose, and they had personal stories that served as strategic vehicles to deliver that purpose. Purpose and story, they go hand in hand. And this, having purpose and meaning is great, but if you can't articulate it to the outside world through storytelling, what's the point? Like, it's just a dream, right? The storytelling is what provides for operational realization of a dream. And it puts it in it transfers that imagery from your brain to the listener's brain. And it's if you think about it, it's an exponentially powerful tool for putting your purpose into the world, and you can't do it without it. So I tell leaders all the time, if you are not training on storytelling, you are rapidly becoming irrelevant in this trust depleted world, because the storytellers are the ones we're going to follow. They already are. And the smart play is to train your ass off to do that.
Right. And a lot of people have a hard time telling their story, and you've actually, built courses and seminars and different things around this. So
I have. And most people want to tell their story, Steve. They really do. And they'll say things to me such as, well, I don't have a story, or no one wants to hear my story, or my story's not as good as hers. And that's all what we call resistance. That's what Stephen Pressfield in The War of Art calls resistance. It's the self-sabotage in all of us that takes us out of our higher calling. And storytelling makes, we feel vulnerable when we tell stories, because what's personal is universal. And in order to actually move people to action, we have to tell stories that are personal to us and that invoke struggle. So there is this vulnerability, clunky feeling that comes with it. And as a result of that, we're often susceptible, or we feel like we don't want to talk about ourselves. But the reality is, storytelling is actually not about you. Stories are told in the service of the listener. This is what I talk about in the book. So what I try to do in the book was to break down storytelling in such a way that you could understand actually what it is, how it works with the brain, why it's necessary, and then look at each of these objections that we all have about why we can't, and then just obliterate the objection and show how, as a storyteller, you very much have stories. You have thousands of stories, because that's how the brain makes sense of the world. As far as your story being better than somebody else's, who cares? If it's personal, it's universal. It has nothing to do with you anyway. And then as far as not wanting to talk about yourself, the best way to be humble, the best way to actually be viewed by people with reciprocity, where they want to do things for you, is through storytelling. If you get up there and talk about 5 ways to be great like me, That's the stuff that's unwatchable. But if you tell a story about how you struggled and what you went through and then what you learned or how you changed from that struggle, you've earned the right to tell people how things should be. And people want to hear it. So hopefully what folks will find towards the end of the book, Steve, is just chock full of tips and angles and ways to be a better storyteller. Because that's my goal, is the world needs more storytellers, regardless of what your occupation is.
Oh, I agree. And one of the last chapters, it might be the one right before the conclusion, is the one that really drew me in, and that was be generous with your scars.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And, that's something that hit me personally because, I have a pretty rough past.
Right.
So, I've learned over time to tell those stories, but it still gets a little bit awkward. It still gets a little bit, I guess, harsh. And sometimes even when I tell those stories, someone's like, yeah, well, you had to because you were down here, right? I've never been down there. How do I relate to that?
Good question. Yeah. You know what I'm talking. So you see what I'm talking about then, because when you tell a story like that, someone immediately compares themselves to your story and they say, well, I didn't experience that.
Right.
I had a great upbringing, or and so they think by definition they didn't, because their struggle wasn't your struggle, that they don't have a story. So let's unpack that. So the generosity of scars that you're talking about is, I built that on a TED talk that I gave to help people understand perhaps that as leaders, the most generous thing we can do in this world is to take the struggles that we go through in our life, because struggle is a biological necessity. It's not something that happens to a few of us. Struggle, by definition, is the brain making new neural connections when it faces new challenges, right? Building new neural pathways. And that clunky, terrible feeling that you experience is, by definition, struggle. And so struggle happens to all of us. It's a biological necessity. And as social creatures who have a mandate to make sense of the world, struggle is it's the arena where it's where we forge steel. Struggle is where learning happens. It's where we crystallize learning and lessons. And if we survive struggle, then those lessons come from that through storytelling. And the brain knows this. The brain has been doing this for 70,000 years, right? And so it has a mandate to do that. And what I try to tell people is that if you're just generous, if you just repurpose your struggles in the service of others through stories, then it's met with immediate reciprocity from the audience. Because when you do that, what happens is this really crazy biological phenomenon called autobiographical listening and narrative transportation. Autobiographical listening is where I listen to your story about recovery and what you went through, and I locate myself in your story, right? And then I go through narrative transportation. Now I'm actually transported into your narrative, but I am making sense of my own life. So, for example, when I first met Ben Owen, who we both know and think the world of, Ben was talking about recovery, and he didn't know that I was in sobriety, and it had been for a long time. And so as I'm listening to him, I'm thinking about my own journey into sobriety and what that was like, and those feelings of vulnerability. And then I started to make sense of some things that I'd never made sense of before. And I felt this reciprocity and connection toward Ben. This happens every day, and this is where the generosity of scars and a guy like yourself who has been through so much, right? The good news is every single one of those pivotal moments in your life is a story that will save somebody's life. And not maybe, it will. It will either change or save their life. And that's why I'm so excited about leaders who've been scuffed up. Leaders who have been scuffed up, who are then armed with narrative competence and empowered by the generosity of scars. There's no ceiling for them. There's no ceiling. That's why Ben Owen has hundreds of thousands of followers on social media, because you just want to be around the guy.
Right.
You want to be around him in jest because he makes you feel safe, because he recovers loudly, right? It's all on full display. But what he's doing, Steve, is old school storytelling. It's what our ancestors did for years. It's just now that we have the neuroscience, we can look inside that hamburger and say, wow, that actually works. And I've done that research and met with those researchers and experienced it myself. And so that generosity of scars, that repurposing of struggle through storytelling, it's the second to last chapter in the book, or the last chapter, because it's the most critical, I think, for leaders today in a time of low trust. The leaders who can integrate struggle into what they talk about in their stories, those are the ones that we're gonna follow, buy from, believe in, and invest in.
Oh, I agree. I look across the landscape of people that I follow too, right? Bedros Keuilian, sexually abused as a child. I mean, the list just goes on and on. Drago Zirin I had on the show. I mean, he was in prison in Poland, right? I mean, there's just all sorts of it, Ben. The list goes on and on. And
Herb Thompson, I don't know if you've seen Herb, who grew up in a trailer park, and had a really rough upbringing. You immediately connect with that guy, and you get his story. Jess Owen is another one. So it's uncanny.
Yeah, it's absolutely phenomenal, and we don't focus enough on storytelling for sure. I mean,
but it's great news too, because there's this notion, the people that have the microphones right now, Steve, they are the polished ones who tell us that if you want to be successful, you have to do these things that I do, and you have to be polished, and you have to be pristine, and it's bullshit. Right. It's not true. In fact, it's unwatchable. What people are hungry for are guys like you and Ben. That's who we're hungry for. We want the guy and the girl who's been scuffed up. We want the guy and the girl who've walked the miles and who now are so generous with their scars that they are willing to repurpose their struggles in the service of the person sitting in front of them. You think about that
yeah.
That is really good news, man. I mean, what a great thing for us to have available to us at this point in our lives. And we need it. And that's really the clarion call of the book, is that the more scuffed up, and look, even if you think you're not, like you had this quote unquote normal childhood, first of all, or upbringing, that never happens. The reality is, no matter what your experience has been, I guarantee you have endured levels of struggle that are relevant to other human beings. And if you will just examine those pivotal moments in your life where you found yourself challenged and up against it and not knowing what to do, it will serve.
Amen. And that's what we should be doing in leadership anyways, is serving, right?
100%. Yeah. I mean, we're not supposed
exactly
to. And asking questions. That's the other thing I talk a lot about in the book is, Warren Berger calls it questionology. But I think the best, most relevant leaders these days are asking thoughtful, open-ended questions that let the other party tell us a story. A lot of times it's not the stories we tell, it's the stories we ask to hear. And that's another thing we go into with the book is how do you use questions in critical moments to lead through situations. And it's astounding. 2/3 of our engagements as leaders should be us asking questions, and only 1/3 should be us running our suck.
Right. Agree with you 100%. So out of this book, what points didn't we hit that you'd like to really get across today, Scott?
Look, I think you hit some really good ones. I'm going to leave the rest for folks to read and discover for themselves, and every one of them has a story attached to it, and I hope you enjoy them. I hope you put them into play. The one thing that I would say, though, and I'm going to show the football a little bit, it's at the end of the book, is this notion that America and really the free world is at the end of days. I don't subscribe to that at all. In fact, there is a tremendous amount of social precedent that we have actually been here before in this country at a very similar place. And it was actually bottom-up leaders like you and Ben Owen and Herb Thompson that got us out of it, that led us through it, and that built movements that we know as the Rotary Club, Alcoholics Anonymous, and Future Farmers of America, just to name a few. And I believe that what happened with Operation Pineapple Express and Flanders Fields and these others in the Afghanistan withdrawal were the first shots across the bow, so to speak, not in a violent way, but in a civil society bottom-up leadership kind of way. And I think it's happening. I think that you don't have to look far to see these movements that people are building because they look around and they see nobody's coming and that they can still get big stuff done. And my hope is that this book, after 30 years of work, will give you the tactics, techniques, and procedures you need to do that big stuff in a very, very powerful way.
Agreed. Wow. I really appreciate your time here, Scott. The book is absolutely phenomenal. It was great to hear your insights about it.
Thanks, man.
So I don't even know how many books you got out. I just did get Operation Pineapple Express in the mail. I plan to read that here very soon. I just heard about Game Changers.
Yep. And I would say there's I wrote another book called Mission America. It's not that well known, but I actually wrote it for anybody in transition. I wrote it originally for veterans, but a lot of law enforcement have read it. And I'll make this offer right now, and I'll do it until I can't do it anymore. But any veterans that are listening to this, if you're transitioning and you'd like a copy of Mission America, hit Steve up, send him your address, and I'll get you a copy in the mail, no charge. We'll see how long we can sustain that, but I wrote it for guys and girls in transition, and I wrote it several years ago. But it's really straight talk, kind of like we're doing here, about how to think about moving into that, changing planets into the civilian world. But I've actually had a lot of people who were civilians read it too, who are going through change, and they found it to be very helpful. So those are my main ones. More on the way, but and then Last Out, if folks can go to Amazon Prime and watch that, I hope they will, because it's a eye-opening story.
Oh, totally agree. I would say that there's a language warning, so
there is, for sure.
Don't have your kids around.
But you know what? Here's the thing. Can I address that real quick?
Yeah.
People have said to me, "What age should my kids be to watch Last Out?" And you know what I tell them? Do they play Fortnite?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Because here's the thing, man. Do you know what you do in Fortnite when you take somebody out? You dance you dance on their body. That's what our kids are doing on Fortnite right now, on this game that's accessible and free to kids around the world. When you kill someone, you dance on their body. You have all these different dances you can do, and the dances are funny, but you're dancing on the body of someone you just killed. So I tell people, and parents there's kids playing Fortnite that are 7, and I tell people, hey, our language is bad, but I guarantee you, we have had kids come to this with their parents. Now, you should watch it with your kids. Advise them ahead of time that there's language. But it will open up conversations on war and what it means for military families that maybe their friends are in the military or their dad is. And it will promote a level of familial understanding that is sorely needed in this country. Unfortunately, the language has to come with it because of authenticity. But I would put it up against Fortnite any day.
Agreed. And I threw that out there, but I also wanted to follow it up with the authenticity statement, right? It's used in the correct manner, right?
Yeah. We don't just say it to say it. It's actually put in there in the places where we say it.
Right. It's real and raw. It's times during war. It's, those times of high emotion. I use them myself. I don't use cuss words daily. But in times of high emotion, I use them. It was a connective point.
Yeah. But fair enough, and there is strong language, and it's heavy. It's a heavy play. That's the other thing. But I think that parents watching it with their kids, and frankly, neighbors watching it with veterans, and veterans watching it with their neighbors to get that shared perspective, and then having conversations afterwards. Mental health professionals who work with veterans, who work with first responders, you should absolutely watch it as well.
Is that play going to continue to be on the road?
So it is. I'm excited. I can't reveal everything right now, but we are weeks away from getting into the next iteration of this play. There are so many cool surprises coming. I don't even know where to start. But if you want, we'll come back together, and when it's ready to go, maybe we could do an episode on it and talk about it and where it's going. I want to get it to a lot more cities, Steve, and the changes that are coming. It's just going to be, we're putting it back out there because people love it live so much. And I don't feel like it's done yet. I feel like now whether or not I'm going to be playing Danny, I don't know. Probably not. There's going to be a younger Danny. But it's getting hard for me to play a 41-year-old team sergeant at 56. So, but I'll probably be in the audience.
Especially how many times you drop down to your knees.
Oh my God. Yeah. And there's a couple times I thought I was going to have to hit my Med Alert bracelet and get somebody.
That's fantastic.
Man.
Well, that's exciting as all get out because I really felt like it was great on Amazon.
It's not the same.
But I can't even imagine what it'd be like being in.
And we do a talk back afterwards, with the cast and the audience, and then we do a storytelling workshop for veterans and first responders. It's a whole community weekend when we come, and we're ready to get back to that. We love that. All of our cast members and even the staff are military community members, and it's just special, man. That Corey Breest silly band stuff happens every single show, and people's lives are changed when in that live event. And so, let's make sure we stay connected on it. I'll keep you posted once we've got it'll be, so if people are looking for a time frame, there'll probably be a few shows in the fall and winter of 24 to get it ramped up, but we should see a full touring schedule in 25.
So when you say this is going to be revamped, are we talking new effects or are we talking a second play?
New effects in the sense of like it's going to be, the writing's going to change a little bit. I'm going to shorten it a little bit. I've got some new characters I'm bringing in. I'll give one hint. One of them is an Afghan voice in the play now, which is going to just take it to the next level.
100%.
Yep. And he was an Afghan interpreter in the war. So he lived it too. And so that's just going to dial it up. I do have, and this is the first place I've ever talked about it, I do have a one-person show that's in the works right now as well.
Nice.
That I'm hoping will be out in 25 as well, around Pineapple.
That'd be awesome too. I can't wait to hear more about that one.
A lot going on.
The other thing that I'm absolutely stoked about that I will come see you for is the Own Every Room.
Oh yeah, man. That is, that's one of the things. My wife and I, we've been running those for years, Steve. We run them twice a year. It's called Own Every Room, and it's a live event, and it's for about 75 people, and it's out at a dude ranch. And the idea is that's where I can best teach human connection, because my dad always says, if you want to get back to your nature, get back to nature. And so we teach storytelling and active listening and all this cool stuff that I teach Green Berets in the Q course and FBI. We teach it out at this dude ranch, and it's so amazing. And you get tons of reps with your story and with different partners and in a circle around the fire. And we were doing that until COVID shut us down. And then for several years, we couldn't do it. And then we just did our first live one this past spring, and it was unbelievable. We sold it out like in 3 days, and we're running another one in September. So I do hope and then we'll run another one in the spring, and people just love it. I mean, if you want to get better at storytelling, active listening, human connection, influence, and you want to train with me, that's the place to come do it. And it's 2 days, it's a weekend, it's a blast.
Yeah. Well, sign me up because I'm going to be there here in the next year.
Awesome. If you go to scottmann.com, Own Every Room and all the other stuff we're talking about is there, and you can find it.
Awesome. So scottmann.com, you just mentioned it. That's where everybody can go and find your stuff. Any other things that they should be checking out, Scott?
No, I just appreciate what you do, Steve, and I really do. You've got a wonderful voice in the community. Your trust is building everywhere you look, and I know your listeners are doing the same kind of work. So to be able to come on and the time that you took to read the book and watch the play, No one really does that anymore, and it means a lot to me, and I know it means a lot to your audience. And so I'm here, and if I can serve in any way, please let me know. And I hope folks will just remember as we go into this election, no matter who wins, there's going to be some challenges in the country that we're going to have to lead through. And if we're looking for Washington to lead us through it, we're deluded. We got to lead ourselves through this and model to them what leadership looks like, and that's where the name of the game is.
Agreed, 100%. Couldn't have ended that any better myself, Scott. The only thing I'm going to leave you with is if you and your wife are ever around the Kansas City area, you better call me and come for dinner.
You got it, buddy. We'll do.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Thanks so much.
You have just experienced the heat and pressure of the forge. Remember, words without action are meaningless. Now, after the heat of the forge, shape your thoughts, quench your brain, then put your new tools to use, adding to your leadership. Tune in next week for more lessons from the forge.